Hello, everyone. My name is Peter. I'm presenting really today on issues to do with depopulation and its outcomes. I'm going to be looking at three countries, Japan, Spain, and New Zealand. And really, this is research that has been that is amalgamated between my own research, which concentrates in Japan and a little bit in New Zealand, and my colleague in Zaragoza in Spain, Professor Saez Perez. Really, well, here's the main title, Depopulation and its socio-environmental outcomes, evidence from Japan, Spain, and New Zealand. But really, what we're asking is whether we can realize perhaps, or take advantage of depopulation and realize a depopulation dividend. So I'll be working towards that question towards the end of this presentation on these three really quite different countries that exemplify depopulation conditions in different world regions. So we're all familiar with this sort of graph that shows us the world population trends. I'd just like you to look a little bit at the Asia part there, where you can see a slight slope and slowdown in the rate of growth of population in Asia. In recent years, and that's looking at world population increase, we can see that population has been many of the world's environmental and social problems are actually attributed to what people call overpopulation. I picked up these cards at the Paris conference in 2015. And really, what many of these people assume is that a slowdown in the rate of population growth, or certainly depopulation, would achieve a reversal or restoration of some of the environmental degradation that has occurred in recent decades. And what I'd like to be able to ask here, and I'm working with many colleagues around the world to ask these questions, is whether actually depopulation can deliver some of these outcomes. We know that populations are getting older, but also populations are beginning to decrease. And really what aging is here, at least my interpretation of aging, is that it's an intermediate stage between population growth and population shrinkage. But we can see there's a lot of countries around the world that are aging: Japan, China, particularly in East Asia, but also South Korea, other countries, and also Western Europe and North America. In Asia, we can see that there's been very rapid population growth in the late 20th century, but in the 21st century, we see that population growth leveling off and then even going into depopulation in many countries. And Japan here is really in the vanguard of that change, with its depopulation beginning in 2008. So we've now had about 13 years of depopulation in Japan. This is what growth and shrinkage looks like in terms of the age profile of the Japanese population, steadily decreasing since the 1950s, a steadily decreasing proportion of children. Since the 1980s, 1990s, a steadily decreasing proportion of people of working age, and of course a great increase in the proportion of older people in the 21st century. This is viewed in Japan and in many other countries conventionally as a crisis. Even people talk about a catastrophe because, of course, of the financial implications and the economic implications of population aging as well as depopulation. And this has spread to lots of other countries, even writers in North America cover the issues in similar ways. But I want to ask is, what I've been working on is depopulation dividend, which I define as the achievement from peaceful and non-coercive human depopulation of positive gains that contribute to socio-cultural, political, economic, and environmentally sustainable living. There's some publications there that people can refer to if later on if they like, and that will explain the research in a lot more detail than this presentation. And I want to ask, what does depopulation look like, and can a depopulation dividend be realized? So here we have Japan. a post-growth Japan, where we see super high density living in central Tokyo, within an urban area of about 35 million people, whereas much of the rest of Japan, particularly rural areas, of course, is characterized by population loss. And even in its more extreme forms, we can see the evidence here of empty and abandoned housing. And we can also see abandoned farms and overgrown rural areas and abandoned and disused infrastructure. I wanted also to, in order to understand the impacts of depopulation, we can, for example, look at changes in resource consumption. And here we have changes in energy consumption by prefecture in Japan. And we see that prefectures where the population is falling on the left-hand side, the per capita usage of energy is rising more rapidly than in prefectures where the population is stable or decreasing. And so we're seeing here that the expectations that perhaps a population decrease would deliver environmental restoration, or at least decreases in resource consumption, are perhaps overstated, at least with the evidence that we can get here from Japan in terms of energy consumption. Here is that data mapped, and we can see that on the left-hand side, population change decreases is expressed in blue and increase is expressed in pink and red. And we can see more or less the reverse image on this map on the right-hand side, which is per capita change in energy consumption, where decreasing energy consumption is most characterized in areas where population increase has occurred. So that's one outcome that we found from the research. When we look at biodiversity losses in Japan, here is a picture of the famous Satoyama landscape in Japan, which is the sort of interface between human agriculture and the forest. We can actually see that there are these days abandoned farms and abandoned farmland, which begins to get choked up with invasive species. And this actually serves to reduce biodiversity, particularly among those species that are dependent on the Satoyama agricultural landscape to be maintained. And now when we go to Spain, we can see that there are, just as in Japan, there are extremes of population density in Spain, along the Mediterranean coast here in Madrid and Barcelona, and in areas towards the southern coast in Andalusia, but also very sparsely populated areas in the interior of Spain. And Spain is also on the cusp of depopulation, leading in Europe at least. And here are some of the impacts in Spain, in Spanish towns, small provincial towns. This town here is Tortosa in southern Catalonia, and you can see the empty and abandoned housing, which characterizes many of these communities. And again, although in Spain it is like Japan, it is considered to be a crisis or a catastrophe, there is some kind of when we look at socio-economic or social outcomes of depopulation, we can see that some small communities are actually becoming repopulated with particular types of people or groups of people, artists, musicians, dancers, and even people working in information technology, who are able to take advantage of good transportation links and changes in working patterns. And this might actually point to the impacts of COVID more recently too. So on the top here, we can see Barcelona. And on the bottom here, we can see Gandesa, which is a historically famous battle site. It's become a sort of a wine town and rural idyll because of its transportation links with Tarragona and other cities on the Catalonia coast. And this is a town really that one couldn't say that was necessarily benefiting from or realizing a depopulation dividend in that sense, a socio-economic dividend, but certainly the social and economic makeup of the town is changing considerably as a result of population change in Spain. And now we come to New Zealand, and we can see even in New Zealand, which is really regarded worldwide as a growth, a country of rapid population growth, we can see that over time, some areas of New Zealand, particularly rural areas and particularly in the South Island, are becoming, are falling into depopulation. Some of that is due to outmigration. Again, some of that is due to aging. But we can see in New Zealand that the population growth that is occurring is mainly occurring almost exclusively, in fact, in the big cities of, or the cities of Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, and so on. And consequently, New Zealand, like Spain and like Japan, is showing us a great contrast in population distribution and population movement within the country as the country develops and as the population structure changes. So even as if you like, an immigration heavy country that is growing quite rapidly in terms of its overall population, there are some large areas like Spain and like Japan where the population is decreasing. And again, we see very similar effects here in terms of abandoned housing, abandoned infrastructure, underused facilities. On the bottom right here, you see a rugby sports field. I think everyone knows that if you see rugby posts in that condition in a rural area in New Zealand, then that town is definitely in trouble. Above, however, how is New Zealand dealing with some of these population pressures? On the top here again, we can see the development of Auckland as a major, at least a major world city in the southern hemisphere. And on the bottom here, in a depopulating region, we can see that the rail trail, the Otago Central Rail Trail, has been transformed from what was a railway that was underused into a tourist attraction that is now the largest non-agricultural contributor to the central Otago economy. So just to round off and to conclude the presentation, we can see that in Japan and Spain and New Zealand show us that depopulation is a global phenomenon. Its impacts and responses are sometimes common to each country or to countries in particular regions, but they're also various. And even as population growth is considered an environmental population growth is considered an environmental disaster, its apparent antidote, which is depopulation, is judged also a socio-economic crisis. So the question we need to ask ourselves then is, how do we deal with the ambiguities that this contradiction delivers? Because on the one hand, population growth is considered a disaster, but its antithesis, depopulation, which would apparently solve that disaster, is also judged a socio-economic crisis, and it excites countermeasures from governments trying to deal with the financial and economic implications of depopulating and aging societies. So we can see that the world remains locked into an accelerated growth paradigm, even as depopulation offers us a deceleration. The dividends are already apparent and possible, and we know what they might be because evidence is appearing in lots of areas around the world. But as yet, these dividends are unorganized, they're disaggregated, and they're unrealized. So one of the questions that I think comes out of this research as well is to ask whether small rural places can overcome our addiction to, I can't read that word there because something's in the way. Could small rural places, anyway, overcome our addiction to growth and show us the way to being both smart and beautiful? So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your kind attention. On this page here at the end, you can click through to some of the research that we've published over the last few years on this particular issue. And I look forward to hearing from any of you with questions, or please email me or contact me independently as well. I'd be very, very pleased to hear from you. Thank you very much.